This is a continental gouge, and this is just the bottom of that gouge without the flat wings. This has two different ways. You can grind it flat across the top, similar to what I just did, which is real handy because then once again you got those corners to go in and take that fillet right down right next to the bead. Or you can kind of ground it in a rounded shape like your thumbnail, so when you're doing that planing cut across the spindle, you'll be able to get a nice curl coming up because you've got a nice curve, so you get a much better slice with it. So there's two different ways to grind it. I haven't had a tendency to really take to this tool yet because I'm so used to this. This was one of the first tools I ever bought. It's, you know, it might as well be part of my right hand. And this is like a little bit lighter, a little smaller handle. I'm just not used to using it. First tool I ever grabbed except for like the bowls. Oh, by the way, this tool is only used for spindle work. When the grain from the wood is parallel to the bed of the lathe, you can use these two tools. When you're doing bowl work, and the grain is perpendicular to the lathe, these are deadly weapons. You do not want to use them to bowl. One thing that's way too much of a cut, and the other is it slide into that end grain and it'll snap right here. So this one just gets ground similarly. And if you want to curve it, you just go ahead and grind on the wings. I'll knock it down, and I'm going to have to touch the heel to the wood first, and then lift it up until I get a cut. And that way I have bevel contact, which gives me control. I'm going to start with a flute straight up and down, or 12 o'clock. And once I get the cut going, I'm going to roll it in the direction of cut. Roll the flute in the direction of cut. I like to have my thumb just above the tool rest, and I put my thumb on top of the handle, just like I would with a bowl gouge. Because the only place I need pressure is on the tool rest, and by putting my thumb on top of the handle, it automatically puts pressure there. And some part of my left hand, if you're right-handed, is going to be touching the tool rest. Because that's my depth stop. It also gives me ultimate control. If you hold it back here, like I've seen some people do, it's very easy to get waves in your piece. But if you lock it in and just set it like a typewriter carriage would be, you can cut a perfectly parallel cylinder. And with this blank, you got to speed up. I was talking and I lost the darn thing. Normally what I would do is I would start my cut here about 1.5 inches, 2 inches in, and go all the way to the end, and then go over another 2 inches all the way to the end, all the way to the end, all the way to the end. And when I get to the headstock side, I'm going to cut and go towards the headstock. You always have to have bevel contact to have control. And sometimes I'll go little shortcuts and sometimes all the way to the end of each cut. It just depends on the music and my move. And I'm going to move my body. I'm going to have my body parallel to the lathe. And most people will center their body up on the piece of work. What I'm going to do is I'm going to shift over so that my tool is automatically lined up with the work. I'm going to drop the handle. There's the surface. As I lift the handle, I'm going to slightly slide it back so I don't have pressure on the bevel. And I start off with a series of light cuts. And now I've got to go from the highest point to the lowest, or biggest diameter to the smallest. So I have to start right out there and go to the headstock. You can't cut uphill, you always have to cut from the largest diameter to the smallest. If this were a long piece, I would kind of cone it like that if it didn't fit in the tool rest. And each cut's going to come further and further away from the largest diameter so that this big wing doesn't contact. Because we need to have the cut where it's supported on the tool rest, which is right there. So on one side or the other is set. If this upper wing connected with this piece right here and run back on it. And that's why I keep cutting closer and closer to the tail stop of each one so I can avoid running that wing in there. Because if I run the wing in there, I'm going to try to do it. I know what's going to happen, so I may resist it. Yeah. I can always do it when I'm in a hurry. But if that wing catches, it runs back on me. So you want to just keep that wing away. And then the cut I was talking about that's like a skew, you're going to have that flat edge at about 45-degree angle. You lay it up, touch the heel first. Technically, I can't cut that out of it. You always need bevel contact. So technically speaking, if I came in from out here and tried to cut that, I wouldn't have bevel contact till I was into the wood and it would pull the tool on. I'm experienced enough now where that doesn't happen. I can resist it. So I'm going to lay it up there at about 45, find that sweet spot, move my hips around, and just slide across that surface. And I get almost as good a cut as you would with a skew, but not quite as good. And if you're going to sand it, it doesn't matter whether you use the skew or the spindle roughing gouge, because there's only one grit of sandpaper difference in the cut. So that's that guy. Now, in spindle gouges, I like a 3/8 inch spindle gouge. They normally come with the wings in. I don't have a brand new spindle gouge, but they normally come similar to this. Actually, the wings are further up. But I like to grind the wings back. And I go ahead and grind that side wing just like I would a bowl gouge with a slight convex curve. You can have it flat or slightly convex, but you do not want it concave. But I really don't care what happens with that side wing, because the only part of this tool I ever use is right there on one side or the other of the tip. The only reason I grind the wings out of the way is so that when I'm rolling a bead, I can get right in there tight. If I still have the wing in and I came around that bead, that wing would hit the other bead on the other side. So I grind it to get it out of my way. And when I'm doing normal spindle work, like balusters and stuff, I'll have this tip rounded like a fingernail, fairly round. When I do those little finials on my ornaments, I'll make it more pointed. Generally, when I'm doing normal turning, the bevel will be about 35 to 40 degrees. When I do those little finials, I put that bevel at 25 degrees. I also relieve the back of the bevel to shrink the length of the bevel. If I had this at 35 degrees, that bevel would be probably 3/8 to a half an inch long. And if I want to do a little tiny cove, I'd have to drop down to a 1/4 inch spindle gouge. But if I relieve that bevel and get it down to about a 1/4 inch or less, I can do a tiny little cove with it and not have to switch tools. So I do a little relief back here. And George Hatfield is here. He kept going, "You've got a convex bevel here." I kept saying, "No, I don't. I've got a relief here and a bevel here that I use." But he kept saying it was convex because he's used to his long, 5/8 inch long, 25-degree bevel that he had. So anyhow, that's the spindle gouge. The way I do this guy is I take a bear grind jig. And now this is where I turn away from the instructions in the one-way jig. The instructions in the jig say, you set this bucket, put a stick here and set this bucket at a set distance from the wheel, and then you adjust this arm for your bevel angle. That's too much to keep track of. What I do is I set my arm in place, and for the kind of grind I have on the side of my spindle gouge, I have this jig set so that pencil will fit through that hole. Or if you've got one that's got, mine doesn't have a little, the newer ones have little indentations here. The pencil fits through the hole, and I think it's at the top of the third little indentation. I didn't bring my other one. So this is one of the original ones.
So Alan, do you ever change that, or once you get it set, you leave it?
Well, I change it because when I do a bowl gouge, it's a whole different setting. Yeah, I don't, and you know, some people I know, they've got it glued in so it doesn't change.
On the web, there's Thompson tools, they've got an angle picture.
Yeah,
That,
yeah.
Is that the angle you put in?
No, because he's got it set for a bowl. His is more towards the middle of the jig. Yeah, I move mine around, and for my bowl gouges, I have this up the other way. You'll find out in a minute. And then to change the bevel angle, I move the bucket in and out. I find it's a whole lot easier. I don't have to keep track of the stick. And I got some jigs that Sorenberger left behind that he used to set the bucket distance.
You said the 1 3/4, is that what you use there?
Oh yeah.
Now on the bowl gouge.
He asked how far I have this sticking out. I have it sticking out 1 3/4 inches. When I get to the bowl gouge, I'll talk about different distances. But I go 1 3/4 inches. My other grinder had to be raised up on about a 1 inch block to get clearance from the guards for these parts. So what I did is I cut a 2.5 inch notch, 2 inch notch, and 1 3/4 notch in it, so I could just stick the tool right up there and up to the notch. On this one, I didn't have that option, so I nailed the board in here at 1 3/4, and I can just stick the jig up and run my tool into it. One way I recommend is to get a block drill a hole in it and stick it on top. That's a royal pain in the neck, and after a while that hole's going to get deeper and deeper unless you bury a penny in it. It's much easier just to draw a line on your jig or something. But I usually have that on an inch and 3/4. Then I eyeball it because wherever I go, they've got a different set. So I got used to just eyeballing and guessing that. Whatever you do, you want to do it the same way all the time. But if I use one of these jigs now, then I'm going to be off. If I use my eye, I'm still doing exactly the same. And right now, this probably has a 35-degree bevel on it. Just to be safe, I'll get my protractor out. But generally, it's about 35 degrees. When you start judging things by eye, after a while, you get fairly accurate. It's amazing how easy it is to just guess at stuff. If you never give yourself the opportunity to guess at things, you never develop that feel for it. So I got everything locked in, make sure everything's locked. Now this is the most important part. When I read the AAW's journal about, I guess it was a year ago or a year and a half, they had a thing on sharpening. And her editorial part said that she always goes over the articles about safety. Well, the first thing that guy says, you put it in the jig here, in the pivot pocket, then you grab the handle. Well, if you grab this by the handle, you get so much leverage, you right off the end of the wheel. And that was the first thing I said, man, that's dangerous. What I do is I gently put my hand up here on the top of the jig. If you put it on a little locking nut, sometimes we roll it back and forth and loosen the nut. So I gently put it here, and I have my fingers so if something happens, they're not going to be jammed between the jig and the wheel. My other hand has one finger holding this pivot point in the pocket. Because if your grinder vibrates, it'll slowly vibrate forward and changing your angle. So it just gently holds it in there. And I just roll it, bring it around and roll it. And what I'll do is I got to keep this in motion. If I just roll it over and let it sit right there, it'll grind a little hollow. So I got to grind a bit at the tip, grind at the back, and then I just roll it back and forth, and that will give you that convex curve. And then I'll come ahead and do the other wing, and then I'll blend the two together. If I want the real sharp point like I do on my little finials, then I'll just make it more pointy. But I really prefer the round fingernail curve here, so that once again we can slice through the wood when we cut it. And you don't need any more pressure. Just enough pressure to hold it on the wheel, stay on the wheel, on one side then the other. And then I blend the front. And then to do a little relief, I just slide it forward. Just grind the relief. And then that's all there is to it. And that's nice. Now, the ones that have the wing on it, you want to keep the wings. You could use this bucket, just like we did with the spindle roughing gouge, you grind it in. Or I'm about to turn this off. It's not that loud. But I need to press the wheel. And I'll just use that like a brake. I know I have to turn it off. I've got to choose this second. This spindle gouge right now, the reason this ground's so funny is I use it for my end grain hollowing. And I've got something like a 55-degree bevel here, maybe even a 60 at that point. So when I go into that end grain to hollow, I can actually come in and when I'm backing out, I can be riding the bevel on the way out and get a nice clean cut. A lot of times you just, goblet or a box, you want to hog the wood out real quick and put this way to do it so it's spindle gouge, but it really tears it up real bad. When you grind it with a shallower grind, you can actually come out, come over the top, and you can actually ride the bevel and get a nice cut. It's a little risky because if you let one of those wings in there, you get in all kinds of trouble. The way I would oh yes, maybe I can't do it this time. This one's too fat. One way sells the littler one. And when your tools get short, and the handle's wrong. But I'll just lay it there and roll it up and around. Right? The flute starts out straight up and down, and then when I do the sides, I kind of roll it close. And I can shape that wing however I want. I'm not going to show how to do that because I don't have much food left. Usually when I start getting low on the flute, that's when I turn my gouges into something else.